You are about to enter the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast on shockwaveskullsessions.com. And now your host, Bob Nalbandian.
Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast number 58. I am joined on this podcast, of course, with my co-host Matt Hartnett and guest Michael Wilborn, a.k.a. Captain Wilby. Captain Wilby was an old friend, actually an old roommate of mine back in, I believe, 99, 2000. We were roommates for about a year in the Burbank area. And I remember back then him telling me some crazy stories about back in the day when he was a musician and just a local rock and roll dude hanging out at all the major 70s concerts. We recently got back in touch and he told me that he's going to start a podcast, and I invited him on the Shockwave Skull Sessions to kind of introduce his podcast and also talk about some of those old 70s concerts that he not only attended but was also a big part of it. Some of the stories a little bit controversial, and some of you might find these stories a little bit unruly. But then again, this was the mid to late 70s where basically anything went as far as drugs and everything else. So we're going to take it back to those times, talk a little bit about some of those crazy stories from back in the day. I know there's a lot of people that love hearing the early 80s stories. A lot of people like to hear the stories from the late 70s. A lot of people that have seen my documentary, The Pioneers of LA Hard Rock and Metal, which was the first Inside Metal title. We got into the Starwood and many of the early LA club scene days prior to MTV and all that from the late 70s, which I find to be the most exciting times in LA. And it was just before my time. But Captain Wilby, a few years older than me, he experienced it all back then. So he's going to go ahead and share some of those stories on this podcast. Once again, this is the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast. You can check it out, of course, on Spotify, Spreaker, iTunes, or Apple Music, as they call it these days, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Google Play, and many other platforms. So definitely check it out. And be sure to check out our homepage. That is shockwaveskullsessions.com. Again, Shockwaves plural, skullsessions.com. You can check out all the podcast episodes as well as Shockwaves Radio, 24/7 metal music. With that said, man, let's get right to it. This is Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast number 58 with my partner Matt Hartnett and guest Michael Wilborn, a.k.a. Captain Wilby. All right, Shockwave Skull Sessions. I got my partner in crime here, Matt Hartnett. What's going on, Matt?
Not much, Bob. What's happening with you? Obviously, not much going on with a lot of us, right? With this whole shutdown. So
yeah, still in lockdown. It's April 18th is the date today. We've been locked down for what, about a month now, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, at least.
5 days, I believe.
That's right. That's Captain Wilby in the back there. He's our guest tonight. Classic rock connoisseur. Captain Wilby and he was my roommate. What was that? 2000, 99, 2000, I think it was.
Yes, it was. It was a long time ago to most.
Yeah, we had some good times, and the reason he is Captain Wilby is because we used to go out on his boat to Lake Castaic and have some great times out on that boat.
Awesome.
I actually took that boat to Hawaii when I moved there in 2001.
I remember we were in contact when you were in Hawaii then. And by the way, his real name is Michael Wilborn, for those that want to get in touch with him. But we'll refer to him as Captain Wilby here on this podcast. So what we're going to talk about on this episode is just bullshit about some of the old concert days. The Captain has been through many, many classic concert experiences, not just seeing some of the great classic rock bands from the 70s and 80s and so on, but actually getting quite involved with the artists at the time. And you have some pretty fun stories to share with us, right, Captain?
Quite a few. I have some good memories, some good partners that I was associated with back in the day, and it was like everybody's parents had connections somewhere.
That's right. And you told me a lot of these stories. I always, because you're a few years older than me, and I always loved the 70s stuff, and I missed a lot of those great 70s classic hard rock bands and, the great festivals like the Cal Jam that you were at and you were a part of and all that kind of stuff. So it was always just great to hear those stories. So before we get started, give a little background about you, Captain.
Well, I started out doing the Sunset Circuit back in the day. I had my own band. It was basically just a three-piece band, a drummer, a singer, a keyboardist. And we used to do the Sunset Circuit, places like Starwood. That's not around anymore.
So we're
And,
talking late
also,
late 70s here, huh? Mid to late 70s, probably?
Yep, mid to late 70s. I remember a couple of times that the Starwood got closed down for some reason. I think it was too many drunks. That's what it was.
Or too much drugs going on.
Yeah, a lot of stories of the Starwood, huh?
It was definitely Quaaludes. But anyway, we'll talk about that later.
Wow, so you actually played the Starwood. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what kind of band were you in, Mike? Were you in a classic rock kind of band, or?
Yeah, I was. Believe it or not, my first keyboard was a Wurlitzer. I don't even think Fender Rhodes came out yet, or maybe they did, but I didn't have one. It was too expensive, so I had a Wurlitzer. And
was that from Woolworth or Woolco?
It didn't have real keyboard action. It was one of them organ things. But yeah, we played around, and of course, as we played around, we got to know some of the other bands. Of course, coming from Hollywood, most of your friends' parents, like John Scheinberg, his dad was Sid Sheinberg, president of MCA Pictures, and he gave Spielberg his budget for Jaws. Wow. So he was a good friend, and he passed around a few backstage access passes, and I got to meet people like Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones, a lot of Ricky Lee Jones, and some of the bands that aren't even existing anymore.
Well, you gave us kind of like a 20 different cool events that we'll kind of go through. And then definitely feel free to add some more, especially any Led Zeppelin stories. I don't know if we have any in your list here. There it is. Backstage at Zeppelin with Peter Grant. But we'll start from the top. And just so people know, so you kind of grew up in Beverly Hills, correct?
Yeah, Beverly Hills. That was the place to be at the time. Matter of fact, I started out in Hollywood. At 10 years old, I was actually slated to be Captain Kirk's cabin boy on the Star Trek. On Star Trek.
Oh, wow.
There was this a small bar called Nicodale's. It was on Melrose and Gower, right next to 93 KHJ.
Oh, I remember that.
Oh, yeah.
The big AM station at the time. That was the original Machine Gun Kelly, right? He was a DJ, Machine Gun Kelly.
He sure was. And so there was this little bar that my dad and mom would stop at, or on the way home, I guess, from work. My mom would pick my dad up from work, and I'd get in there. I met all kinds of different people, and Gene Roddenberry was one of them. And he invited me onto the set. Of course, back in those days, they didn't have the guards, and you needed a pass to get on the set. It wasn't so high security like it is today. And I was just floating around in between Mission Impossible and Star Trek, and I think I was 10 years old. That was the last season. So what happened was...
What year would this be?
68.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so Gene Roddenberry was going to make something like what they have on the Next Generation with the Wesley Crusher character, kind of an ensign that grew up to be this, I guess, Dr. Crusher's kid that grew up to be an ensign and started piloting the Starship Enterprise. But back in that day, he liked to have the kids. The third episode in the first season was an episode called Miri, and it was about parents who, actually kids who got into puberty, and they were called grumps, and they got these like boils and cysts all over them. And my buddy Phil Morris, who is Greg Morris's son, who was the black character on Mission Impossible, the original Mission Impossible, he played in that series there, or the actual episode of Miri. Until he got older, he only had that one spot. As things got kind of heated up with Martin Luther King and all the other stuff, he started getting into the breaking the color barrier type of thing. So he had that first interracial kiss between Lieutenant Uhura and Captain Kirk. Wow. And that was history breaking right there. And he also wanted to have something else going on where a kid was involved on a daily basis. So that summer, they went into hiatus. I was going to acting school. And unfortunately, the show got canceled. So my life took a different turn at that point. Wow. Otherwise, I probably would be a movie star. But a rock star is much better So let's get into the rock stuff.
You know what, Matt? I think his stories could rival John Harrell's stories, huh?
I was going to say, it's very similar, right?
It is
Very
similar. If, for those that don't remember, we had John Harrell on one of the early podcasts. I think it was 3 or 4. And this guy, John Harrell, he's a huge photographer now, but he started out on the set of, what did he was Ronald Reagan's photographer for years. And but he started out with like Happy Days. And his claim to fame is he fucked Linda Carter. So if you could top that there, Michael Wilborn, then
I'm waiting to hear it, Mike.
well, let's get into it. Should we start? Just go down the list here, or?
Sure. Yeah, I think I got a list there for you.
Yeah, but one of my favorite bands, Thin Lizzy. I know they toured here a couple times with Queen and with Journey. They very rarely made it out here because they always had problems every time they came over to the States. But you have a cool story about Thin Lizzy.
I sure do. Back when playing small arenas like the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium, I think that's a 4,000 or 5,000 seat arena, and Thin Lizzy was actually playing there, and I was invited to go backstage, so my name was on the list, but I didn't go because I didn't really like the band. I didn't like Thin Lizzy. Phil Lynott was kind of a jerk, but at the same time, a lot of people enjoyed his music.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
So he was a jerk. You say he's a jerk?
Well, a jerk meaning arrogant. Not a jerk like you and me, but
he was like a rock star.
So I didn't go, but my friend knew that I was on the list, and he went instead of me. And unfortunately, this guy, his name was Robert. We used to call him Robert.
So back then, they didn't check IDs when you were on the list.
Yeah, they wouldn't check IDs or anything. Matter of fact, if you knew, they would keep the list hidden, kind of on their chest.
Right.
And you'd walk up to them and say your name, and they'd look on the list to see if your name was on there. And if it was, you got a pass, and if it wasn't, you didn't. So I guess my friend, I don't know exactly how or how, whatever, but I think he told him my name and got his pass. And then after the show, he took off with Phil Lynnett's bass guitar.
Oh, damn. Wow.
I know. And I'm sitting there, okay, so the only reason why I know this is because he brought it over to my house bragging about it. And I was like, well, how'd you get in? And he says, well, I used your name. And I was mad. So I took the bass guitar away from him. But let me get to the story here. So this bass guitar, it's a Fender bass. It had a mirror reflection type of guitar guard on it, or a pick guard. And it wasn't worth much more than $200. I mean, it's just a Fender bassman. But what happened was his mother had bought that bass guitar for him.
Yeah.
And he didn't make it. She died, and he had not made it to stardom yet. So that guitar was really important to him.
Well, she had died just recently, actually.
Yeah, she's been alive for a while.
Well, back in those days, it's kind of foggy, but
it could have been his grandmother, because I know I think he lived with his grandmother for a while too.
Is that what it was? His grandmother?
It might have been, yeah.
Well, that was the thing back then too, right? I mean, there was a lot of the stealing of instruments going on back then, I mean, which is kind of happening again these days. But back then, it was like such a
huge
thing that people were doing, right? Yeah.
Well, I listened to I don't know if you ever listened to Steve Jones. They actually have it on YouTube now. You can check it out. But it's on KLOS, the local rock station, as you know, Captain Wilby. But he has great stories. But before Sex Pistols, and he made a living stealing instruments. He would go to these shows, like at the Hammersmith Odeon in England, and he knew the routes to get in. And he had like David Bowie's, microphones and different stuff, and that was his thing. He would just go in and steal the shit, and he's, he admits all of it.
The kleptomaniac situation back in those days was very wild.
Yeah,
people just trusted each other. It was a very different time and date and age back then, that people were just trustworthy. A lot of stuff didn't go down during that time.
Well, yeah, those days you could just leave your car windows open and everything, and no one would fuck with it.
Yeah, the bass guitar, right? So he had this mirror reflector. He used to always reflect people with the spotlight into the mirror pick guard. But after the show, this guy Robert, I won't mention his last name for purposes we all know about, stole his guitar and brought it back to my house. And I was like, what the hell did you do that for? Oh, don't worry, nobody caught me. He left it at my house, and he went to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. And he started, when you come into the lobby off of Wilshire Boulevard, you go past the check-in desk, and you make a right turn past the elevators, and there's this long hallway that goes out to the side street. And it used to be lined with little displays, glass displays of mink coats. This was before the animal rights stuff. mink
Right.
coats and mink vases and all kinds of crazy stuff. And he got arrested because he was taking that stuff and putting it in.
Wow.
Putting into my other friend, Captain Jack, we call him Captain Jack. He used his car to do all that stuff. It was an old LTD. He got busted, and the guitar's sitting there in my house. And I'm like, okay, what do I do with the guitar? It's a stolen guitar. What can I do? So it just sat there for a couple of days. And then me and Jack, Captain Jack, we're in his car. No, I was in my Pinto. I had a lime green Pinto.
Nice.
And we were
Wow, nice.
yeah. And we were traveling up, I think, Vine Street on our way to Hollywood Boulevard. And we hear on this station, we used to listen to a station called KMET.
Ah, yes. The Mighty Met, of course. One of my favorites.
Met, and Sandy Rhodes, Dusty Rhodes, I mean.
Dusty Rhodes, yeah. Mary Turner.
Yeah, Mary
Jim
Turner.
Ladd.
And Jim Ladd. Oh,
Yeah.
he's a legend.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, guys. That is a legend. So what happened was I hear this on the radio. KMET's offering, Phonogram's offering a $2,000 reward for the return of Phil Thin Lizzy's guitar.
Wow.
And I'm like, turn around, make a U-turn. We're going to go get this stuff. And
that's
so
a lot of
we called
money back then. This would have been like 1975, maybe 76.
I would have to be, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I would believe 74. So what happened was we made a U-turn, and we went back, and I went home, got the guitar, called up KMET, and me and my other friend, he was another guy, we went to Phonogram, and we dropped off the guitar, and they gave us a check for $2,000. Now, of course, we got the third degree, and the third degree was, how did you get this guitar? And we told them, basically told them the truth. Someone used my name off the backstage pass, off the backstage list, and then stole it and brought it to my house. And when I found out whose guitar it was and this reward, we brought it to you. They were trying not to pay us or pay me, but they actually ended up doing it. I still got the check stub. So
Wow.
that was a cool 2000. That was a lot of money back in those days.
Oh,
There's
hell
no way
yeah.
there's no way today you'd be able to get away with that. I mean, you would be assumed guilty right away. There's no way they would give you the money. You know, they would. I mean, that's a cool story, though. That's great. Yeah,
I'm sure Phil just wanted his bass guitar back too.
exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and unfortunately he died later, but he played Queen and Thin Lizzy played at the Forum, and my friend who was with me when I returned the guitar, he went up to Phil Lynette and he goes, "Hey Phil, I'm the guy who returned your guitar," and Phil popped him right in the face.
Exactly. There you go.
Good. So was that the actual guy that did take the guitar?
That was another guy.
Oh,
He was
okay.
like my roommate. I kind of shared the reward with him because, whatever. It was just
Right.
one of those things. We were kind of like tight buddies.
And Phil popped him in the see. That could have been you, dude.
I know you got the money and you got no punch to the face. That's a good deal.
I know. I got the money and no punch.
Well,
So yeah, that was a very peculiar story. Only because that the kind of things that were going down were the things that I was not accustomed to doing. I was accustomed of getting passes and going backstage and enjoying the concert. I wasn't there to steal. I wasn't there for clout. I wasn't there for doing anything else. It was just one of those things that happened, and I got into the middle of it because this guy Robert kind of after he dropped off guitar went to the Beverly Hills Hotel, which was owned by a friend of mine's father. What was his name? Cartwright. It was Davinier and Hernando Cartwright, and they owned the Beverly Wilshire, and they lived up by the Beverly Hills Hotel right behind bungalows where, of course, Stevie, Nicks, and all the other people were hanging out during their concerts.
Sure.
But yeah, that was a very, one of the oddest stories that I could tell you.
well, let's move on here. You had a pretty cool story about the ELO, the Electric Light Orchestra in Anaheim.
Yeah, you know what? That was a very awesome show.
This
They
Anaheim
came out-
Stadium?
It was Anaheim Stadium,
Wow.
and out in the middle field, a big stage, and the stage was a spaceship.
Okay, I remember
It
that.
Wow.
like
It was on their album
a flying
cover, yeah.
saucer. Of course, when the other bands were playing, they were sort of like playing in front of it, And then when the ELO came, the top of the saucer lifted up. And then, of course, they all came up like on elevators or something like that. And that's when the band started playing. Well, what was great about that show is after the show, we went into backstage, of course, had the pass. And they had a big tent. and everyone was given a bag full of chips. They were poker chips, kind of like not worth any money in Vegas or anything, but just their own little ELO poker chips. And they had Vegas tables. They had the roulette, they had the craps, they had the blackjack, and you could get, however much you won, you could buy, trinkets of some sort, like a teddy bear or something. I can't remember exactly, but the neatest thing was the backstage passes were like the lowest backstage pass, because of course they had stage access and backstage and whatever. They had different levels of backstage passes, right? So the lowest level was called the Space Cadet. It was a light blue. They had different levels of backstage pass, and I had 2 of them. It was just neat how they kind of themed everything. The whole saucer, for ELO, and then the different levels of backstage pass, and of course the after show. Big, huge tent, and everyone just partied out there. The chips they gave you for free you didn't have to pay for them or anything. It was just, one of those cool concerts at Anaheim.
That's cool. People don't realize how big the shows were back then. Way bigger than today. I mean, of course, you had Kiss and even bands like Angel and, Parliament, bands like that had huge production. And their shows, and of course ELO were one of those bands too. That was a big bill. I remember that was kind of like the Boston with Black Sabbath and Van Halen, wasn't it? Wasn't there a few bands on that bill with ELO?
You got me, because I think I remember Boston, but that might have been a different time. But I do remember on not that show. Of course, they wouldn't have like another headliner band.
Sure.
So, but Boston was one of the other shows I went to. That was at Anaheim. I got a little bit of intoxication on that one.
Well, let's talk about the Cal Jam too, man. That was a classic show. That, of course, was in Ontario.
Speedway.
The Motor Speedway. Of course, the first Cal Jam in '74 had Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Black Oak, Arkansas and all that. And the second one had, let me see if I remember, Ted Nugent, Aerosmith, Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush, Santana. Was it Hart? Hart was on there, right?
Yes, Hart was on there.
Seals and Croft. I'm not looking either. This is just off memory.
Contrast, I'll tell you, between
Rubicon?
those two.
Yeah, Rubicon. That's right. They were on too.
And you remember during the first one in '74, everyone, it was so crowded, everyone just parked their cars on the freeway,
right?
And caused a big traffic jam, and they had to tow the cars off, and a lot of people's cars got stuck in a tow yard.
Right.
So what they did for the second one, where I went, is they had the bands, because there was a lot of congestion. They had the bands flying in from a hotel in a helicopter and landing backstage.
Right.
So that's how Aerosmith came in. So they kind of fixed the traffic jam, because you'd leave an hour before the show, and then you wouldn't get there for an hour until after the show started, because it was just so much traffic, so huge, and they didn't plan ahead. But the second time they did for the Stars, because the Stars were getting caught up on the first time. So they brought them in from a hotel not too far away via helicopter. And then there was the Rolling Stones also played there. They had a concert there where they were filling up balloons on each side of the stage with helium, and they needed people to help blow up those balloons, and then they released them. Now, you couldn't get away with that today because of the environment concern of balloons falling down, or after they pop or whatever. But we were able to do that back in those days, and it was actually pretty exciting. And that's how I was backstage for that concert, and you'll see that on the Facebook page. But one of the best shows that I ever went to, and you were talking about big productions, was The Wall. And of course, they had so much prop that they had to put they played on the East Coast, and they had to put all their props on a ship. And I believe the ship went down through the Panama Canal and then came back up on the West Coast.
Oh, wow.
So
Damn.
The giant pig.
Yeah, the giant pig and all the blocks, those the wall blocks, they were huge. And the airplane and, just so many different props. So they had to put them, they couldn't ship them via truck. So they put them on a boat or a ship and went through the Panama Canal. And that's how they got around to the West Coast. So when they played New York, they played New York first for 7 nights, and then they came out to the sports arena, which is no longer there, unfortunately, next to the Coliseum. The first night, my friend got me a backstage pass. I noticed, and this is kind of a little hokey-dokey, but I noticed that the laminates for the crew, it basically were the crosshammers. You remember the red and black crosshammers?
Sure.
for that show. And then it just said crew underneath. So I kind of remember what it looked like, and we went to a art shop in Westwood, and I got the laminating and drew the little hammers and put a crew underneath there and laminated it and put it on a lanyard and stuck it around my neck. And that's how I got to see the rest of the 6 shows. It was a homemade backstage pass, yeah. It worked. I mean, they weren't really looking closely at it, so you'd have to kind of shuffle through, you know. You have to wait for 2 or 3 people that were coming in to get there early, and the crew's coming in. They have their lanyards on or whatever, and you kind of walk in with a bunch of them, and they make sure you have one.
That was a big thing, I remember, in the late 80s and 90s. People were making homemade laminates. They would find out the tour, what the laminates look like, and they would just make them themselves. Yeah, that was a big thing back then.
I got a laminate from when Genesis played at the Roxy Theater on Sunset Boulevard.
Wow, what year was this? Was this a private show or like a unannounced show? Or because Genesis were huge even in the early 70s, weren't they?
Yeah, and I think it was 82, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wow. So we're talking like Duke or even after Duke. Yeah, when they were real big.
Yeah, I think Peter Gabriel had already left the band.
Sure.
So what happened was I knew I was going backstage that night, and I was riding my motorcycle home, and something happened. A car cut in front of me, and I ended up in the ivy. But I had cut my head open. I was only a few blocks away from home, and I got home, and I stopped the bleeding and everything, and I got all fixed up, and I went to the show. During the show, I was out in the audience. I still have the shirt today. My head started bleeding again. So I got these little droplets because it would go down the hair and drop on my shoulder and stuff like that. And after the show, because I guess I was head bopping a little bit too hard, and I went backstage. It's very small.
The Roxy, yeah.
I guess they call it now Top of the Rocks or
on the Rocks, yeah, which was above the Roxy, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike, what's his name? The Genesis guitarist,
Michael Rutherford.
Rutherford, yeah.
He comes up to me. He goes, "Dude," he goes, "You're bleeding." And I look on my shoulder, and I see the little, blood drops. And he goes, "You got to go to the hospital." And I said, "Yeah, I couldn't go because I wanted to see you guys so badly." And he goes, "No, dude, you got to go." And I said, "Well, if you sign my T-shirt, I'll go." So he put John Henry on my shirt, and I went to the hospital. It was nothing big. It wasn't a stitch worthy. It was just something I needed a cold compress for a day and just relax. But I still got that shirt today.
Michael Rutherford saved your life, dude. You could have had a brain tumor from that.
I could have had a concussion.
A concussion.
I was going to say, so I got that backstage clip, that laminate, because they were playing at 2 other places. Of course, they played at the Forum and at the Long Beach Arena. And the laminates were the same color for each show. Backstage passes, they weren't. They were always a different color or something like that for every show or every night at the same arena. So the next couple of days, I made up another fake laminate and got to see Genesis down there at the Forum, and then, of course, down to Long Beach Arena. That was kind of a little awesome thing that I did for myself. Of course, I don't know what else to say. I'm kind of a bad boy for doing it. But, yeah, it was kind of a big thing back. Everyone's making their own laminates. They got smarter as the days went on.
Back then, it was a lot more difficult to make than today. Obviously, anybody, and their mother could make one today because of technology. But back then, that wasn't easy to do. So I guess they just weren't as adept to people sneaking in. Like, obviously, now they expect that, and they have all sorts of security ready to take care of that. But, those days, yeah, right? Yeah.
You're looking out for that, too, yeah, because nowadays you can get a good printer and make $100 bills. So,
but nowadays going backstage is nothing like it was back in the 70s or 80s.
That's true because now the radio stations they announce backstage VIP for blah blah blah. Enter the contest. Give us a call. Blah blah blah. You're the 5th caller. Blah, and it's not backstage. It's VIP. It's kind of like a section off the stage.
Yeah, you pay for a meet and greet is basically what it is. You get to meet them for like 2 minutes, get a handshake, and if you're lucky, maybe get a picture and an autograph.
Exactly. And if there was too many people, you wouldn't even see them. They would just
back in the day, you would hang out with the band, drink beers, and do coke with them.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, speaking of which, talk about the record plant story. I remember you telling me this back in the day with the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger and Ronnie Wood.
This is before Ron Wood joined the Rolling Stones. He was still with the Faces. Ian was on the keyboards, and Mick Jagger. They were all at the record plant. Now, this is when the record plant was located on 3rd and La Cienega before they moved deeper into Hollywood towards La Brea and Santa Monica. So me and my friend, we showed up one night because we knew everyone at the record plant, and we went in the studio, and there was Mick Jagger. And I was like, hey, let's go check this out. And then we saw Ron Wood there, and we were partying with him, smoking some weed and doing whatever. And all of a sudden I said, hey, Mick, can you do me a favor? And he says, what do you need? Or something like that. I can't do an English accent that good. I said, could you call my girlfriend and just say, hell, wake her up. It's 2:00 in the morning. And he says, sure. So we get on the phone in the sound booth. My girlfriend answers the phone. She says, what are you doing calling me this late? And I said, here, I got a friend who wants to talk to you. And, of course, Mick got on the phone and said, what's up, love? She's like, who's this? He says, it's Mick Jagger. She didn't believe it until I bought back an autograph from him and with her name on it. I don't know. She was pretty stoked, I got to tell you, at the least.
Well, you probably got laid that night or the next day.
The next night, yeah. Because that night I think we drank Lowenbrau's and smoked some weed and a couple other little things that we did.
Lowenbrau, wow, I haven't heard that in a while.
The beer of choice back then. That was like the elitist beer back in the day. Yeah. Now it's like, now it's like Old English or some malt liquor. But back in the day, Lowenbrau was
high-end stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't no Michelob. But anyway, yeah. But the funniest thing was Ron Wood was there and the keyboardist for Faces. And then we were all partying. We didn't know. There was a little jam session, no big deal. And then all of a sudden, about 3-4 months later, I think that's when Ron Wood, of course, his nickname Woody, joined the Rolling Stones. And we were like, wow, we were actually sitting in a session where they were trying to, put down some licks for this new person to join the Rolling Stones. So that was a pretty awesome little deal there. I mean,
you were part of history there, dude.
That's history. And Ron Wood still plays.
Crazy.
And
I'm seeing on this list too, it says something about Woody there had a nice little encounter or time with your girl at the Wright House.
Deidre?
Yeah. Tell us about that.
We'll say her name. What the hell?
Here.
For some reason, they all, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, Rod Stewart, they all stayed on the 7th floor. I think the 7th floor was like a security floor or something like that. Since we knew that they were going to be on the 7th floor, I had booked a room on the 7th floor so they could get access, because you can't get access. They have it locked off, people standing in front of the elevator. Hey, where are you going? Let me see your room key and all that stuff. So me and my friends were up there, and I brought Deidre up there, and Ron Wood's walking down the hall. I stick my head out. I say, hey, Woody, come on over, party with us. He's like, oh, just a minute. And he comes knocking on the door 5 minutes later.
So you knew him by then, because this was after the record plant, correct?
Yeah, but I had also, Rod Stewart, his producer or manager lived up on Coldwater Canyon. Since, Coldwater Park was where he practiced kicking his soccer balls. Right. I had met Rod Stewart quite a few times. And, of course, Woody was part of the Faces. So I had been to, I guess, what was that, San Bernardino? I think it was called the Swing Auditorium.
Exactly, Swing Auditorium, yep. And the Orange Pavilion, but the Swing Auditorium was the first one, yeah.
Yeah, the 215 and the 10, I think it was off of.
Yep.
So we had been backstage, and Woody and I and Rod Stewart and everybody kind of knew who we were, because we were like I wouldn't say groupies, because mostly the groupies were girls. We were just kind of like the guys that were hanging out and had some good weed. And so they would always invite us in. Matter of fact, a good story, I got to tell you, remind me about Chris Squire. And yes, Woody comes to walking down the hall, stick my head out the window or out the door, and he comes back 5 minutes later. And the next thing I know, Deidre's gone, and so is Woody. I'm like, where the hell did these guys go?
Well, you introduced her to him, right? Bad move, Mike. Bad.
Never introduce your girlfriend to a rock star.
Never.
She was not my girlfriend, because I had probably multiple girlfriends at that time. Right. My main girl was a girl named Lori, but that's another story. So I obviously knew what was going on. So he was with her down in his room, which was at the end of the hall.
This is the infamous Riot House, of course, right?
Yes, with
Yes.
the Ride House, the famous Ride House. I think that was also the time that Rod Stewart and I were kicking soccer balls down the hallway.
Now back
And,
then, that was like an amusement park. If you've seen like Almost Famous, you would see the hallway with everyone partying, and John Bonham used to drive his motorcycle down the hallway there. I mean, it was just fucking insane for people that don't know. Continue.
And it always happened on the 7th floor for some reason. For some reason, that was always the.
Well, you're probably right. That was probably the rock star floor, and they kept private, and because it was just no man's land. It was just for the stars and the groupies.
Yep, and the people who knew about it. I'd met Woody quite a few times. Matter of fact, there was one not so good time that Rod Stewart actually said no. He was at the show with us, and I'll tell you what happened. We were at the Swing Auditorium, and we were backstage, and of course they did Maggie May, which was their encore song, and I said. Hey, listen, we need to get out of here before, the crowd starts, after the show's over. And so we left sort of at the end of Maggie May. And we got back to the hotel, which this time Rod Stewart was staying at the Beverly Wilshire. Okay. And what had happened was during that concert, someone had broken into Rod Stewart's and Woody's room and stolen some guitars. I was coming up the elevator, and the police were already on that floor, and I had beaten them home, even though they had limos and good drivers. I drove like a maniac when I was younger, but I got up there, and they looked at me, and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm waiting for Rod. We were just at the concert." They said, "You're under arrest." And I said, "What for?" "Oh, there was a burglary in the room, and you're under arrest. You're being detained." And this is the Beverly Hills Police Department.
They knew about that Thin Lizzy guitar. That's why. They knew about your reputation.
Yeah. Maybe. No, I don't think so. And so I'm handcuffed, and I'm being taken down to a squad car. And when I get down to the lobby, there's Rod Stewart and Woody. They go, "No, he was at the show." And he couldn't have done this because they obviously had some kind of a mobile phone in their limo or something like that. Somehow they were notified that there had been a robbery. And one of Woody's guitars or two Woody's of guitars and somebody else's something else that was stolen. And they said, no, he was at the show. So I got released right away. So Rod Stewart's like, "Oh, I'm his alibi."
See, he released you in exchange of you giving him one of your girlfriends. So that was a fair exchange.
Get out of jail free cards. Oh, man. Yeah, there was quite a bunch of thievery going on. And, of course, that was where Robert, that guy, got arrested after stealing Thin Lizzy's guitar. Same place. And the only reason why I was able to get in that hotel was because my friends Davinier and Hernando their father basically owned the place. So they kind of knew me, but didn't know me. And the Beverly Hills Police, of course, they don't like anything suspicious. They'll arrest you just on your blinking wrong, or something like that. So that was kind of a little trip. And another little situation that I got involved in was Uncle Recording Studios or Rehearsal Studios.
Yeah, that's up in the valley, right? Van Nuys?
Yeah, off of Kester.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
I know. I've actually jammed there myself.
Encore, right?
No, Uncle.
It was Uncle.
Okay.
Yeah, it was there just. I think it's just a few years ago, 5 years ago or so. We finally closed down, but yeah, that's a great place. I know exactly what it is.
Yeah. And I think David Barber owned it and sold it to a guy named Mark Walton, and then he was the bass player for the Dream Syndicate.
Okay.
So that was that little episode. But one day I was driving up and I see a guitar on the curb. I mean, it's in the street leaning up against the curb. And I go, well, shit, the studio's closed. And what do I do with it? So I stick it in my car. And a day later, I go back, and there's a piece of paper on the billboard that says return $500 for the return of.
So you made a living on this, right? Stealing guitars and then getting the rewards. I know you're a scam, Captain Wilby.
Sitting on the side of the curb, right? So I pick it up, put it in my car, and next day I see this reward for $500. It actually belonged to the blonde chick. What's her name? Michael Jackson's girl.
Oh, okay. Jennifer Batten.
Yeah, Jennifer, right.
Okay.
So I didn't really want them to know that I picked it up, but I still wanted the $500. So me and my friend, I told my friend to turn it in, but everyone found out at the end of the day anyway. And
well, you picked it up innocently, right? It was left. I mean, whoever had on the side of the curb obviously left it there.
She accidentally left it there, and when she got home, she realized what was happening. And the next morning, she called up the owners there and offered a $500 reward. And I came, of course, after that reward was offered, and I said, well, I didn't want the owners to think that I had stole it, but I didn't really steal it. I kind of kept it from being stolen, because if I didn't pick it up and put it in my car, some other jerk would have stolen it, and they probably would have never seen it again. So in a roundabout way, I did a favor, but I got blamed because I did something good, but at the same time, they didn't want me to collect the money for it. And I'm like, well, hell, I want the money.
Yeah, you returned it. It would have been gone. Mm-hmm. And the guitar was probably worth 3 times as much, probably like a $1,500 guitar, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it was the lead guitarist for that, Jennifer. Yeah. And, of course, right around the corners where all the pornos were made. Yeah. So it was a really shady neighborhood. You know, They had Caballero pictures, Vivid. Right. All those pornos were made right there. And then right next door to where they were being made was the Beverly Hills Beach Club for 90210. So that's it was a very, very shady neighborhood at the same time. So another little story I wanted to connect here, the connect the dot type of thing, is that Chris Squire used to, well, he's not around anymore, but
from the bass player, for people that don't know,
the bass player, the Rickenbacker guy.
Yeah.
He smoked a lot of weed. So the owner of Uncle Studios and we flew out. Chris Squire paid for our plane fare and our hotel and gave us backstage to, the Superdome. They were playing, Yes was playing at the Superdome.
What year are we talking here? This would be 80s then, 80s or 90s even.
The last part of the 80s.
Okay.
New Orleans, right? The Superdome?
Yeah.
Part of the 90s.
Right.
And so the owner and we actually flew to New Orleans with a couple ounces of weed. Now, you couldn't get away with that nowadays because of the TSA and the dogs and all the other stuff that,
depends where you're flying from. I'll be honest with you. These days in certain places, you can still do that, but I know what you mean, though. Yeah, it's a lot more difficult, of course.
I wouldn't want to chance it. Let's put it that way. It's a federal.
There you go.
Even if you're leaving out of California, and that it's legal nowadays in California, you're still on federal property, and it's federally illegal.
Sure.
And of course, that could land you in a lot of heat. But back in the days, they didn't check for that stuff. We could put it in our bags, our carry-ons. Wrap it up a couple of times so it didn't smell like skunk. And so that was one of the other type of things. Also, the owner that I went with, the owner of Uncle Studios, he also was selling to Billy Idol before Billy Idol stopped smoking. So there was a point there where he was smoking like crazy, and then all of a sudden he stopped.
He starts snorting instead, pretty much.
Trade one for the other.
One for the other.
You never, when you're an addict, you never stop being an addict of one thing or another. It's just the mentality that addicts have. Mm-hmm. If you do it for a pleasure thing or something to calm your ass down after a show, that's different,
Sure.
But if you're doing it to be creative and you're, smoking a little weed before you write a song, or makes you open up a little bit.
Well, speaking of snorting, I want you to. One thing that jumped out to me on this list is I want to hear the story doing coke with Stevie Nicks at the Hollywood Bowl. That I want to hear.
Time it was her when she wasn't on stage. She was in the wings snorting a bunch of lines there.
She's not called the Goldust Woman for nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, she was pretty much doing a lot of drugs and having a great time. Of course, she was very mystic and very famous, and so that was the only time I actually got to be with her and meet with her, even though I'd seen Fleetwood Mac a couple of times. Mac was kind of a jerk. He was in control of everything, and a lot of times when I've got shows at the Forum, it's because I was at the top of the tunnel, and I'd get there 10 o'clock in the morning when they were unloading the trucks and putting the stage together, and I'd say, hey, would you like a hand? I'm kind of like a local guy here, and I'm pretty familiar with setting up stages. And they would slap a backstage pass on me, and I'd go down past the guard, and I'd, be rolling equipment cases around and, doing all kinds of stuff. And that's how I got to see the shows most of the time, was just hanging out and offering my help. If it wasn't my help working, it was my help and getting, local partyables. That was kind of a trip. Yeah, you remember we were talking about the VIP backstage, where basically you were corralled into a bunch of KLOS listeners or whatever, and maybe you'd get a picture or maybe you'd get an autograph. But back in the days when Led Zeppelin, before 1980, and when Bonham died, and prior to that in the 70s, there was no special section for the general public backstage. If you had a backstage pass, you were rubbing elbows with everybody: Peter Grant, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Bonham, all those different kinds of people. I mean, you could just walk up to them. And the best thing was they would have trash cans full of Heinekens and Lowenbrows and all those things.
The high-end beers.
Lowenbrow again. Here we go.
They were the domestic. They were the American equivalent to the Heineken or whatever.
Exactly. And it'd be filled up with ice, and you'd reach in there and grab yourself either a Coke or a beer or whatever. And you were right in the same room as the stars. You were not separated. You weren't in a different corral where, you're just with a bunch of the general public, and you're hoping that you'll get a glimpse or something like that, or an autograph. But that one time when I went and saw Led Zeppelin backstage, and that was a trip, watching Stairway to Heaven with the Dry Ice Fog and Dazed and Confused and the different things. Jimmy Page was his violin bow and all the different things that I can remember almost like if it was yesterday, just watching it from the wings instead of being out in the audience. I remember the physical graffiti show I had backstage at the Forum. I remember walking on the floor towards the stage to Trampled Underfoot, and there were women like nuts going, take me backstage, I want to go backstage, because I had a pass up my leg, Yeah, it was just, those times were really...
Well, did you take them backstage there, Wilby? Huh?
I only had one pass, but I'll tell you what, I would go backstage and I would tell the girl, hey, go over to the side and I'll hand you my pass, and you put it on your leg and you come back. And that's how I would take once I got backstage, I'd take my pass off.
I knew you were a fiend.
Oh, how would you get laid otherwise?
Well, as long as you don't introduce them to any of those rock stars, you're good to go,
Yeah, there's also the Jethro Tull bursting out at the Forum.
I remember that tour. Whitesnake opened, I think, didn't they? Was that the tour Whitesnake opened? David Coverdale?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. I can remember the time when he would put these giant balloons and he'd balance them on his nose. And these balloons were very delicate. I think it was the second night. My friend that I went with took out his, I think, Bic lighters had just come out.
Right.
And while he was on the stage, because he would balance it on his nose and then throw it.
I remember that, yeah.
And the audience would kind of bounce it around until it popped. My friend took out his Bic lighter, and he threw it at the balloon, and it popped right on Ian Anderson's nose.
Oh, man.
It shook him up a little bit, but he got the third one out. It was the second night, second balloon. And he got the third one out because he only did 3 balloons. That was a trip. I mean, I did hang around with some pretty shady people, but I was trying to be a good boy most of the time.
There was another story about David Bowie at Universal Amphitheater.
That was before they put the roof on the amphitheater. It was open air.
I never knew that, because I was always wondering why it was called an amphitheater. It turned into the Gibson Theater, and now it's a part of Universal Studios. But I saw many concerts there, but never when it was open theater. So we're talking 70s. Would this be like the Ziggy Stardust era? Or?
Yes, it was definitely Ziggy. And I think there was, I don't think I was there the night. They had 2 or 3 nights, but I don't think I was there the night. Some girl rushed the stage with a rose to give to David Bowie. And the bouncer kind of tossed her around a little bit, and Bowie kicked him in the head. And then I think he walked off the stage, and that was the end of the concert. I wasn't there that night, but that was during the same tour, I believe. But, that was the early 70s. And as I was still I was 15 or 16 at the time. I don't remember. Oh, I had to have a car. So, yeah, I was 16 or 17. I wasn't 15. So, there's really different kind of a stride with the rock stars back in those days. Now there's too many crazy people, so they have to have this tight security in order to protect. I mean, all the time now you see people running up on the stage and trying to kiss or hug or do something with the main singer or the guitarist or something like that, and they really have to be alert, these bouncers, and they do protect the stars. But back in the older days, people were not as aggressive. as they are today.
Yeah, that's very true.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go with the Queen at the Santa Monica Civic. That was what, sheer heart attack era, or
it was where Freddie Mercury, right?
Right.
So Freddie Mercury would go on the stage would be dark, and he'd be in one spot, and the spotlight would come on. He goes, "Now I'm here."
Right.
Now I'm here. And then it would go dark again, and then be over on the other side of the stage, and the spotlight would open up there. Now I'm here. Now I'm here. So that was like their first. Yeah, it was like Sheer Heart Attack. I think that song was on.
That was on Sheer Heart Attack. Yeah.
That was kind of like one of the first shows I ever went to. It was neat. It wasn't really a big production, but the music was just amazing. I mean, so many bands played at the Santa Monica Civic. Johnny Winter.
Yeah.
Ted Nugent played there, right?
Yeah. The Tubes.
The Tubes. You and I saw the Tubes at the Key Club. Remember that one? That was a great show.
I was doing the phone system for the Key Club. Matter of fact, I did it for the Whiskey, for the Key Club, for the Hollywood Palladium, for the Pantages Theater. I was doing all the phone systems because those big venues, they need to have a business phone system in there so they can have an intercom and have multiple lines. They just didn't have like a home phone, and we weren't into digital or anything like that at that point. So the electronic phone systems, I had my own phone company. It was called Phone Guy. In 1986, when the phone company broke up, I started putting in jacks and fixing static on the lines, and then the phone company became more independent, and people had to start buying, instead of renting their system from AT&T and having Pacific Bell or GTE run the dial tone to the system, AT&T started making their customers buy the phone system or buy a new electronic phone system that had all the bangs and whistles that you see phone systems having today. So the Key Club, while I was there, Prince was there. So many people were there.
I didn't realize the Key Club was around for that long. I didn't know it was around since the 70s.
No. It was Gazzari's then. It turned into the Key Club.
It turned into
in the 90s. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Prince did the debut show at the House of Blues too. I remember when the House of Blues on Sunset just opened. So
right. If you saw the show and you were upstairs eating or something like that, the whole upstairs would move apart from each other, and then you could look down at the stage.
Exactly. And the bars would separate, yeah. And actually, before it was the Key Club, it was Billboard Live. Remember that? For about a year.
That's right.
And
then
it
went from Gazzari's to Billboard Live,
right,
and then the Key Club. And when it turned into the Key Club, I was in charge of the phones and basically anything else. We didn't really have too many computers, but anything electronic, anything that I could. I had carte blanche there. I could go in anytime. I actually put in the palm print access to the VIP room downstairs. I did a lot of security implementation for, getting through to different places.
You and I did a couple jobs together, I remember. You took me on. I remember it was one big, gigantic house in Beverly Hills. I think the guy was like producer of the Hellraiser movies or something. It was like a $13 million house, and you were doing the security cameras for that. And I came along and helped you out on that. That was a blast. Remember that?
Yeah, his name is Larry Cuppins. It's one of the largest estates. He had a half a mile driveway.
Yep,
and I think, didn't you help me put in the tubing for the wires to get down to the gate? So
exactly, it got corroded somehow or something, and the wire ran like a mile long or something. When we're all up the driveway,
about a half a mile.
Yeah.
And we had to put it under dirt, and it was a tough job, but we got it done. So I would do I'd have to put in relays. They didn't have like Ring doorbell back in those days. They didn't have video doorbells that connect to your cell phone. So I did the actual phone system there and the video cameras, one in each kid's room. His name was Larry Cuppins. He was TriStar Pictures. He was the president of TriStar. And believe it or not, the name of the street that he lived on was Mockingbird Lane.
The Munsters.
It wasn't 1313, but it was close. But yeah, you can look. That's one of the largest estates up there now, and he redid the whole house. He did the interior, and that's when I ran all the wires for the video camera system and the phone system and everything like that. But I was like one of the few people. I did that for Don Simpson, who lived on Stone Canyon Road in Bel Air, that's what it was. He lived right on Stone Canyon Road. That was before he died. Jerry Bruckheimer, they did 48 Hours.
TV or movie producer.
They were partners, and then, of course, Don died. But I got to put in the phone system there. He was like the kind of guy, if he called you or if his girl Susie called you and you weren't there in an hour, he nexted you. He'd find someone that would, treat him with, kid gloves. And I remember one day he calls me up, or actually Susie calls me up, and she says, hey, one of the intercom speakers in the house is making a strange noise. I said, I'll be there within the hour. So I got in my car, stopped the job I was doing, got my car, went over there. By the time I got there, he had already shot a hole through the damn thing. And I had to order a part and this, that, and the other deal.
He literally shot a hole through it with a gun?
With a gun, yeah. Just
got pissed. Fuck this.
It was squealing. I don't know. Susie said it was making a lot of noise. He didn't like to hear it, and he shot it. So
wow.
We all know about the Rainbow and the different things that went on there in the parking lot with Paul Fegan.
You mean Fig, of course. They call him Fig?
Yep, drove around in a purple Excalibur.
Is that what those were? The Excalibur? Yeah, he was famous for. I think he recently passed away.
Yeah, I saw him in a movie doing a juggling act in the back.
Yeah, he was a character. He was an attorney, right? He was like David Lee Roth's attorney, and he used to have parties on New Year's Eve at his house. At his rundown house in Beverly Hills, and he would and there'd be 1,000 people at this party. I went once, and it was just mayhem. It was just way too many people. But
he lived up above the whiskey, and you would have purple parties where everyone would have to wear purple.
I just remember everyone had to have a suit and a bow tie on for this New Year's Eve party.
But I met my first wife at the Fig party. I'll never forget that. That was pretty trippy. What was the other things that you wanted to touch upon?
Well, you mentioned the Baby's demo tape fiasco.
That's another robber story. So they were having a rap party.
This is the band The Babies, John Waite, right?
Yep. And of course, I knew him through Ricky Lee Jones because they were tight, So I got invited up to the rap party at their house, and sitting on the piano there were the demo tapes. And the album hadn't come out yet, the first album.
Now, are these cassette tapes, or are they like reel-to-reels?
No, they were cassette.
Okay.
No, they were 8 tracks. No.
Well, I thought they might have been like the master tapes, like on quarter-inch reel or something.
No, not at all. Of course, those don't usually leave the studio, and they have to be
right. But this is before the album came out. Nonetheless, they were demo tapes.
Yeah, before the album came out, of course, everybody got one. Everyone in the band got one. A few guests a few trusted guests got one, but Robert took one because I had brought Robert to the
dude. Why do you take Robert to these things after he's a klepto?
Because I was young and dumb, and I got to tell you, he was one of my good friends, and it was unfortunate. I think the Phil and Annette thing happened after or before. No, it was after. But we were still friends. Of course, when I didn't split any of the reward money from the Phil and Annette thing, we weren't friends after that. So it'd have to be. So anyways, the Babies. So he took one of the tapes, and the Babies were like freaking out. They're like, "Where's that extra tape? That tape? We can't let it out of our sight. That's our debut album." And so of course I had to get it from Robert and take it back to him. I didn't get no reward for it, but I sure did get chastised. The Starwood. So I became a bartender there, and was up in the VIP lounge. They had the disco and the main lounge bar, and then they had the VIP in the rock room. And the VIP was up on the second level, and of course Devo was. They came out. Aerosmith played there. The Rolling Stones were supposed to play, and they, of course, they were under an assumed name on the marquee, of course. But they canceled it because it got out. Everything got out, and a bunch of people showed up there. But the best thing about being a bartender at the Starwood was after the club closed down at 2 a.m., there was always confiscation hour. And confiscation hour means that all the drugs, everything that was confiscated by the bouncers as people were walking in. Of course, Deidre was there. She dropped a jar of ludes, and the ludes, they were in glass jars, and it busted. He was trying to sneak in there to sell them to people. So there was plenty of ludes and plenty of coke and plenty of this, plenty of that, whatever you wanted, Tuinals, Secanols, Nebidols. It was all Placidils. You guys remember green and red Placidils? All the good stuff that didn't really mess with your mind, like the drugs today, like meth and
heroin and everything,
tar chasing the dragon stuff off the tinfoil, which is just completely nuts. Yeah, and that's the reason why we're still alive, is because we had the good pharmaceuticals back then. We didn't have to chintz ourselves out, and I don't know. The drugs these days are more dangerous and more destructive.
Well, yeah, it's laced with so much shit these days.
Yeah, you don't know what the fuck is in it.
You don't know what the hell is in it, where it's coming from, exactly.
Yeah. Well, why don't you give out now? You're actually going to start your own podcast, right, Captain?
Yeah, it's going to be called Captain to Captain, No BS. My other friend, who's Captain Jack, I mentioned him earlier in the show. So I've put together a few interviews. One with a Playboy bunny from Hugh Hefner's mansion. She worked there for 17 years. That's going to be the first podcast, or one of the first. And then, of course, a couple other different things. But you can look for it on your favorite podcast channels, anywhere you get it, Spotify, iTunes, whatever. But it will be Captain to Captain, of course, abbreviation, CAPT, and then the number 2, and then CAPT, and then it will say no BS.
And when is this going to launch?
It's launching next month.
All right. Well, we'll definitely check it out. And I know they could contact you on Facebook under Michael Wilborn, and you also got
It's just going to be Captain Wilby.
Captain Wilby.
And then the backstage passes, if you want to look at that, or if you have any to contribute, you can upload it. That's my backstage pass. So it would be www.facebook.com. Captain Wilby is my personal page, and that's spelled CAPTWILBY. And then my backstage pass, not plural, just singular. And that's my other second page.
There you go. You can check out all the backstage passes on all the stories he was talking about today.
Yeah, and we're gonna go over some more stuff we didn't get to today, because my friend Captain Jack, he has more stories that I wasn't involved with because he was in a different part of the country. Right. So we're going to get together and put together many stories and have interviews that are, from the old days.
Well, cool. Well, Captain Wilby, it was a pleasure catching up with you. Matt Hartnett, my co-host.
Yeah.
We will be back next week. Let's definitely keep in touch.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys. Great talking to you.
Yeah, it was
great
fun,
talking to you, man.
Fun catching
a lot of fun.
up.
All right, see you guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening to the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast. Subscribe and listen to all episodes by going to our pages on iTunes, Spreaker, YouTube, Spotify, and more. You can listen to all other episodes and access up-to-date information and news on the Shockwave Skull Sessions podcast by going to our website at www.shockwaveskullsessions.com. Email all comments, questions, and suggestions to shockwaveskullsessions@gmail.com.